Hey there, friends, and welcome to this episode of SelfKind with me, Erica Webb. We are going to talk today about one of my favorite questions, and it's a question that I've started asking myself fairly recently and that I shared recently in one of my email newsletters that I think can be really supportive if you are trying to embrace your high sensitivity, but that feels maybe a little bit tricky. So we're talking about one of my favorite questions at the moment, and full disclosure, it's a question that I've really only been asking myself in fairly recent weeks. It's not something that I've used long term, but I'm finding it incredibly helpful, and I'm finding that with clients it's really helpful as well. And that question is to ask yourself, what would honoring my sensitivity look like right now? Now, the reason that I really like this question is because so often when we're highly sensitive people, we have been told by the world and by specific people that we're too much, right? Too sensitive, too sensitive, too much of a crybaby, too much of a spoil sport, too serious, too something, right? And our sensitivity can therefore feel like something that we need to minimize or hide, or even get rid of in order for us to fit in. The problem, though, is when we aren't honoring our sensitivity, we get overwhelmed more quickly, we get exhausted, and we might just not feel like ourselves. And so I think that when we're starting to make that shift from seeing our sensitivity as potentially a negative thing or a only problematic kind of hurdle to get over, it can be really helpful to start thinking, okay, well, what if my sensitivity, when honored, is more of a superpower, right? In terms of if I am nurturing this sensitivity, much like if I'm nurturing myself, what am I capable of because I've looked after myself? And so I almost want us to think of our high sensitivity through that lens, right? What happens if I take my sensitivity and instead of saying you're wrong, you're bad, you're too much, this is not the way that it should be, we say, given how you are, how do you need to be nurtured? And when we take that approach, then I think things really start to change. So it's a simple question, but it might not always be a simple answer or a simple thing to respond to. And so I want to give you a few examples of what that might look like. The sort of alternative, I guess, path that most of us take, or we've taken at some points in our lives, and we'll probably take at other points in our lives as well, is to ignore our sensitivity, push through it, or criticize it. And if you're highly sensitive and you have sort of known this about yourself, or even if you haven't known that about yourself and you look back in time and kind of consider how you've reacted to your sensitivity, you can probably see times where you've ignored it, where you've pushed through it, and where you've criticized it. So I want to talk about, what it might look like when we honor our sensitivity. And it's not going to be one thing all the time. It's not going to be the same for every one of us, and it's not going to be the same in different circumstances. So that's one thing that can be tricky, right? Because when we say, well, what would honoring my sensitivity look like? It doesn't lead us to always just like, here's the right answer. Honoring my sensitivity always looks like saying no, going to bed, whatever. Sometimes it might be the thing that is hard, the thing that is challenging, the thing that feels vulnerable. So let me give you a few examples to make that hopefully make a little bit more sense. So when we're honoring our sensitivity, sometimes honoring it is going to look like resting. But sometimes honoring our sensitivity is going to look like doing the thing that feels hard. How do you know the difference? That is something that we do through trial and error. That is something that we do as we start to get to know ourselves better. I know that for me, honoring my sensitivity sometimes means that I have to do the thing that feels hard, but speak really kindly to myself in the process about why it's hard. Oh, this feels really tricky because, the alarm bells are going off that people might not like you if you do this thing, right? And so sometimes honoring your sensitivity is just like, what context or what support do you put in place for yourself through your self-talk, through your environment, through your support networks, in order to be able to do the thing that feels hard. And then other times it's going to be like, don't do the thing, go lie down, right? Saying no when you mean no and saying yes when you mean yes are ways of honoring your sensitivity. And that can be tricky for highly sensitive people because we like to please. We like to do the things that will make other people happy. And so saying no when you mean no and saying yes when you mean yes can take some practice. And speaking of saying no, last week's episode was all about saying no as a HSP. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and there's some tips in that one. Another way of honoring our sensitivity can be doing the self-care stuff that recharges you and loves up on your sensitivity at the same time. So doing things that you feel really good doing, things that bring you joy, things that recharge your tank. Often for HSPs, this is spending time alone, doing things that downregulate your nervous system. So slow movement, meditation, listening to music, stuff that just makes you feel more resourced. Getting enough sleep, which can be hard for HSPs because sometimes your brain is just going. But honoring your sensitivity can sometimes mean noticing, oh, I am getting very overwhelmed and very worked up, kind of doing all this head stuff. And I know things always feel worse when I'm tired. So I'm going to honor my sensitivity by kind of like laying that aside for the night, going to bed and picking it back up in the morning. Self-compassion, self-awareness, and honesty are also ways that we can honor our sensitivity by being really honest about the fact that this feels hard because I'm sensitive. This feels hard because I know that these things, trigger me in some way or make me feel more vulnerable or make me feel something that is uncomfortable. And so when we can be self-aware and when we can be honest with ourselves, then that leads us to being able to be self-compassionate because we can acknowledge, this is hard. And sometimes that simple acknowledgement of this is hard, but I still want what is on the other side of it can, mean that we can do the things that maybe feel difficult. One of which might be doing the thing that honors your sensitivity, but perhaps, let somebody else down or means that you have to not do something that you said you would, whatever the case may be. And so that self-awareness, that honesty, that leads into self-compassion. And I think my favorite way that we can honor our sensitivity is through our self-talk. And I already kind of alluded to this when I said, right at the beginning around when we need to kind of maybe do the thing that feels hard, but we can support ourselves through the way we speak. This is huge. So I want you to think for a moment about the way that you would encourage a small, nervous, anxious child to do something that was difficult. You wouldn't berate them. You wouldn't say, oh, you're so silly because you feel scared. You shouldn't feel that way. Obviously, you're just too sensitive. Although, side note, some of us might have literally been spoken to like that. So I get that that is also a possibility. But if you were being compassionate, if you were being loving, if you were being kind, if you were honoring that child's sensitivity in the moment, how would you speak to them? You would say things like, oh, I know this is really scary. And because you have the kind of system that picks up on lots of information and puts the pieces together and kind of sees things that maybe other people ignore, it does feel overwhelming because there's a lot to take in. And this is nerve-wracking and new and scary, and you're making yourself vulnerable. So of course it feels hard. But just remember that you are capable of so much and you are loved and you are doing this because. So it's about having a conversation with yourself that is kind and compassionate, like a little pep talk, right? But a pep talk that doesn't try to dismiss your sensitivity or say, just ignore it and then you can push through. It's self-talk that honors your sensitivity. And even, can put it kind of like in the limelight and be like, it's because of your sensitivity that you're feeling like this, but it might also be your sensitivity that means that you're going to create something wonderful or experience something that is really remarkable. And so being able to just have that conversation with yourself is really powerful. A lot of the tools and techniques that I use revolve around the words that we say to ourselves because they're really, really powerful. And if you are perhaps new to that, to talking to yourself intentionally, it can feel a little weird. We talk to ourselves all the time, whether we're doing it intentionally or not. And so when we can be choice-driven in the words that we use and the things that we say and what we choose to focus on, it can be incredibly significant in terms of how it shifts things for us. So that is it. I really just wanted to share that question and share some ideas of what that can look like, what that can, how that can kind of come to be. But that question, what would honoring my sensitivity look like right now? Sometimes it'll be doing the thing, sometimes it will be not doing the thing, and sometimes it will be supporting our sensitivity through the way that we talk to ourselves. And yeah, I'd love to know if that feels helpful. So please feel free to connect with me. You can come and visit me on Instagram at @EricaWebb_SelfKind. You can comment if you're on YouTube, and you can always come over and visit the website as well. It's ericawebb.com.au. All right, I'm going to keep it short this week. I hope you are, able to take that question, get curious about it, use it if it feels supportive, discard it if it doesn't. And I will look forward to talking to you again really soon.